Welcome to this year's 2014 SG Presidential Debate. We're your moderators, Krystal Foster.
And I'm Cody Cohen.
This year's election is a pivotal one for American University, with issues like divestment, the student activity fee, and financial aid. Our debate format is as follows. The first 30 minutes will give the candidates their opening statements and move on to our first questions, financial aid and divestment. Then we'll have a short commercial break and move on to the student activity fee, the Wonk campaign, and MGC third floor space. Be sure to stop by on the Tavern Floor Town Hall debate at 9 p.m. If you want your questions answered, then be sure to use our hashtag SGDebate. Before we begin, let's introduce this year's candidate. Alex Hoffman, Poulami Banerji, Sophia Wirth, and Tyler Bowders. The opening statements were chosen as random order. Our first candidate will be Alex Hoffman.
Thank you. My name is Alex Hoffman, and I'm running to be your student government president. I'm running to be your fighter. I've been fighting my entire life. I grew up with a single mother, I'm battling 2 learning disabilities, and I have student loans up to here. I want to fight for you, and it's time student government had a fighter. I will fight to help keep tuition low. I will continue the fight for student space that I started in August, and I will continue the fight to divest from fossil fuels that I was part of since the very beginning. I'm sick of the buzzwords. I'm sick of the faulty promises. It's time we had a fighter and someone who will actually listen and actually keep their word.
Ms. Banerji.
My name is Poulami Banerji, and I'm a junior in the School of International Service and the School of Public Affairs. I'm working to represent the student voice and student action. We all have platforms, and this week I've really spent time listening to students in clubs and organizations to understand their issues and what they want. Students want a burden-free financial aid appeals process. Students want fossil fuel divestment, and students want better representation for their organizations and clubs. They also want small things like better publicity through student government for their events and the initiatives they're taking on. If elected, I hope that I can be that student voice for you. I hope that I can be that vehicle for student action, and I hope that I can continue supporting the student voice and student action that has been going on for the past 2 years that I've spent at this university.
Ms. Wirth.
Hi, my name is Sophia Wirth, and I am running to be your student government president. We've seen a lot of issues in the last week and a half, and I've seen a lot of issues in the last year and a half. And something that this campus is really afraid of doing is challenging the status quo. There are a lot of big issues. The university budget, having an administrator pay freeze, allocating more of that money to financial aid, and keeping tuition as low as possible. Fossil fuel divestment, encouraging the university to divest and then invest in clean energy. It doesn't make sense for us to be educating leaders of the future if we're invested in an industry of the past. Sexual assault awareness and prevention efforts, putting real pressure on the university administration to be held accountable for that issue, and more support for student clubs through active advocacy partnerships, student space, and more co-sponsorships and funding. We have an opportunity to really address these issues, and it's time for us to drive progress together.
Mr. Bowders.
Hello everyone, my name is Tyler Bowders. Ever since I came to this university 3 years ago, there are a multitude of identities that I've come to embody. University club leader, university employee, SG director, financial aid recipient, and low-income student. I believe that it is the collection of all these that make me the most rounded candidate for SG president, to represent all of you on a host of issues, from unpaid internship assistance, to ensuring a low tuition increase, to even sexual assault prevention and divestment. These are all issues that affect us here at this university, a university that I truly care about and believe in. And I hope by the end of this debate that you will believe in AU and Tyler too.
Okay, let's move on to the first topic of the night, financial aid. You have all mentioned financial aid as a major issue throughout all your campaigns. Do you think that it is appropriate to touch upon these topics given how it's been addressed but not executed by previous presidents? What makes your approaches different? Mr. Hoffman?
Sure. So I'll say that as a student here who is paying 100% in loans and Pell Grants, this is personal to me. And it's personal to a lot of students out there. Being the person who gets to be in the boardroom, trying to argue to make sure that we have the lowest tuition increase humanly possible is extremely, extremely important. Now, in honesty, I don't think that student government can do that much about financial aid. I think we can advocate for tuition freeze and for the lowest increase humanly possible, but really it comes down to what the administration does. What we can advocate for is making the lives of students so much easier, and that comes down to AU Central. AU Central is a big bureaucratic machine that's run very, very poorly, and it should be the best on this campus. We should create something in student government that's a liaison between AU Central and student government and the campus community at large to make sure that people's loans and financial aid appeals are processed efficiently and effectively.
For me, financial aid is a thing that is a large part of the student body. 70% of students at AU are on financial aid in some capacity. Most of the students are on financial aid by need-based. So my two concerns are, how can we make the financial aid appeals process less of a burden on students? Having gone through the process myself, I know that AU Central is, as Alex said, burdensome, and we need to make sure that that process is more linear. A way I would propose to do this, if elected, was create financial aid advisors for students. So similar to academic advisors who tell you if you're on track to graduate with your credits, there should be someone you can consistently go through throughout your 3 to 4 years here at AU, who you can sit down to and talk to about what it means for you to afford this university and what it means for you to afford this huge price tag that you're paying for your undergraduate degree. And the best way to do that is to have some face time with someone in that office. That really will help make the financial aid process a lot easier and more linear.
Ms. Wirth?
The issue of financial aid is absolutely paramount this year, and the reason why is because next year the Board of Trustees is going to be selecting our university budget for the next 2 years. This affects our tuition, it affects our financial aid, it affects administrator pay. To me, the way to address the issue of financial aid is two-pronged. You have to focus on accessibility and literacy. Something that makes me different from the other candidates is that I've had the opportunity to work on the financial aid task force this year to really address these two issues. The first step is accessibility. Because next year is a budget year, we'll have an opportunity to really advocate to the Board of Trustees that we need an increase in financial aid. That is, without a doubt, the top priority in this issue. The second issue is literacy. 50% of students report that they don't have the resources they need to make educated decisions about financial aid, and that is astronomically high. No student should have to mortgage their future in order to attend this university. And by addressing the two issues of accessibility and literacy, that's the way that we can really target this issue.
Mr. Bowders?
As a club leader, I'm well aware on how underutilized club leaders are in working with university advocacy. Therefore, my plan for ensuring a fair increase in tuition, as well as making sure that student government fights for an increase in need-based aid as well, is to utilize these club leaders through a process known as Educate, Broadcast, and Act. Through this, it will be my job as your next student government president to go into these board meetings with these Board of Trustees members and come back and bring back every piece of information to disseminate through these club leaders. They will then broadcast it through the university at large with student government in tandem. It is through the utilization of these clubs that we will get this student body as a whole to act. In terms of AU Central, the biggest problem there is the privacy factor. No one likes to go into your AU Central and talk about your financial aid at a main front desk with 12 other students sitting behind you. What your student government can do is to fight to ensure that you're having a fair conversation with the people in AU Central.
Ms. Banerji, some of your opponents, such as Mr. Hoffman and Mr. Bowders, feel that a tuition freeze is unrealistic or inappropriate to your promise. How is your proposal different from the previous approaches?
Advocating for a tuition freeze is the only option if we're willing to represent the student body. The students want the lowest tuition that they can possibly pay for this university. The students that are currently in this university have reflected that time and time again. As a student government president, it's not in my purview about whether or not something is possible or something is impossible. It's about representing the student body. For me, representing the student body means advocating for a tuition freeze at the February board meeting. It means talking to administrators about whether or not that is something we can do. And it's about putting that foot forward, because if we're asking for something that is impossible, that is going to give us some room to negotiate with the administrators and with the board. Students are being honest, and they are dealing with loans, and they're dealing with financial aid issues, and the student government president needs to be brave and go into that boardroom and fight for them. So that's why I've been advocating for, that's why if elected I would advocate for a tuition freeze at the February board meeting.
Mr. Hoffman, Mr. Bowders, rebuttal?
Sure. Well, let me first say that I would kill for a tuition freeze. A tuition freeze really would solve all of my problems when it comes to the rising cost of tuition. I'm here, like I said, 100% on student loans and Pell Grants, so that really does affect me. But I want to be realistic about this. I'm hoping that students on this campus actually do fight and say, we want a tuition freeze. And I'm hoping that they go out in March, just like they did last year, because that's going to put pressure in the boardroom. And I will fight to make sure that we do have the lowest tuition increase humanly possible, because I will be personally affected by this, and so will plenty of the students that I have met during this campaign. But at the same time, we need to make sure that we are realistic and we are doing what is right for this campus.
Mr. Bowders, do you have a rebuttal?
Yeah. I don't think it's any secret that all of us on this campus would love a tuition freeze. To me, this next increase would potentially mean the possibility on whether or not I come back from year to year, even if I wasn't a senior. But I'm not in the business of making promises that I personally can't keep. We've seen in the past with SG presidents who have gotten elected and promised a tuition freeze and couldn't potentially follow through. But what they could ensure is a 2.78 increase, the lowest we've seen in years. And I feel that it would be in the best interest of the students at large to fight for that as a point of clear and productive advocacy.
I have one question for Ms. Wirth. You stated that you want a increase in financial aid. What type of financial aid would you be specifically talking about? Because if more students get loans, according to CNN Money, the average loan for students in America is around $29,400, and you just stated that you don't want students to be taking out these large mortgages for their future. So what type of financial aid would you be talking about and be advocating for, and how would it be difficult to give these students?
Sure. So the reality about financial aid is such that American University has increased the number of low-income and first-generation students that it's accepting to this university, but hasn't changed the way that it allocates financial aid. What we need to do is increase financial aid. It's not an easy ask, but it's something that the university consistently does. By keeping tuition as low as possible and increasing financial aid, it's going to help offset skyrocketing costs, because currently the financial aid situation that we're dealing with is not sufficient. So basically, what we're fighting for is an increase. It's something that happens every year or every 2 years, and that's something that we need to continue advocating for. The largest increase possible is really the only thing that we can accept.
And would you be putting more grants, more scholarships? Is that what you're leaning towards?
Absolutely. I think the first step is to increase financial aid generally. I think that definitely looking towards grants and scholarships is a really good way to do that, but also increasing need-based financial aid, which is a lot more reflective of the first generation and low-income students that we've been accepting. That's really where that money should be going, and by having an increased financial aid package, that's the best way to address that issue.
Great. Before we move on, I just want to remind everyone back who's watching to be sure to use our hashtag for SG Debate for the town hall at 9 p.m. So moving on to our next topic, we'll be talking about divestment. Divesting from fossil fuels are a big part of each of your campaigns. Are you aware that in order to pass this feature, it needs to go through a board of trustees? Unfortunately, the board will be sitting down during your transition period. So how will you balance your transition while also making an effective impact on this issue?
Sure. Well, I've been lucky enough to be the only person who is sitting on this panel tonight who has been part of the fossil-free movement from the very beginning. So when it comes to being prepared for the Board of Trustees, I am the most prepared. I've been trying to plan this out with all the members of this fossil-free coalition and the other 30 organizations since last year. I'm prepared, I'm ready to fight day one. I know what it takes, and I know what the Board of Trustees are going to be saying. I know how the Finance Committee works. I have understood all the parts of the Socially Responsible Investing Committee and what has gone into that. And I know that this is going to be one of the biggest fights that I'll have to take on. But if you want someone who actually is prepared and someone who has been dealing with this from the beginning, or do you want someone who just started getting used to fossil free because it was politically convenient because they started to run for president, you know the right choice.
I think that the work for SG presidents starts the day after they're elected, not when they're sworn in. So it's all about how can we get the information about fossil-free AU out to the students, because the main point of action is students. Student voice is the strongest form to push something to the board and to really communicate with the board. The SG president is given a seat at the board meetings, yes, but the real source of action and power is in the students. So that means the day after elections, once the president is announced, that means that they go right into action. How can we better educate students who maybe haven't been active in the campaign so far to really understand what this means for our generation, what this means for climate change, and what this means for the future of AU? How can we better mobilize students? And I think that that work can start right after you're elected. It doesn't have to be after transition brunch or after being sworn in.
The reality of this situation is that climate change is truly the moral issue of our generation. Divestment plays a really important role in affecting that issue. So by divesting from fossil fuels, it basically means that we are no longer profiting from oil and coal companies, the companies which are leading to a climate catastrophe. So what we can do is speak to the Board of Trustees, absolutely. But I agree that this cannot be done just by the president. The president is only one voice. The power comes from the student body. Fossil fuel, AU fossil free, that's something that I've been an active participant in, both in terms of lobbying to the board, participating in their actions. It's been something that's been a great privilege. I think that by having student government work more actively with fossil free AU would be a really valuable way to make sure that we can initiate the change that is truly desired. And in hopes that the board does decide to divest, which they absolutely should, the long-term goal is to encourage them to invest in clean energy. That's the way that we can truly reflect the fact that we are a green university, both in terms of our public persona, but also in our private investments.
Mr. Bowders?
In the interest of honesty and transparency, I will agree with Alex that he is correct that I personally have not been that active in the fossil-free movement. But that doesn't mean that on the first day in office, I expect nothing less than to be thrown head on into the water. I kind of picture it as metaphorical binders and notebooks being tossed at my head. But I feel I am prepared because I've been here and done this before with a local school board. I was not in the majority. I faced a lot of board members who didn't agree, but I stayed and I fight and I never walked out. Because what you will learn when you're in these positions is that when you walk out, students stop being represented. So I am willing and able and prepared to go in there on the first day and stay until the very bitter end.
I have a question for Ms. Wirth. Ms. Wirth, you just stated that you worked closely with the committee and the board, but however, it says you recently just joined Fossil Free AU. Obviously, it's a major part of your campaign. How do you believe you have contributed in the divestment cause over the last time period you've been part of that movement?
Absolutely. So I joined Fossil Free AU this past January, and I think it's an important distinction to say that I didn't join because it was politically beneficial. My joining Fossil Free AU is actually something that encouraged me to run for president. I didn't decide to run until pretty recently, and being a part of this active organization is something that really pushed me in that direction. I feel that the position of student government president is really an influential one in terms of affecting this divestment movement, and I believe that by not only participating in Fossil Free AU, but also extending that over into the position of student government president, that's the way that we can most effectively address this issue, and it's something that I look forward to doing.
Next question is for Mr. Hoffman. Mr. Hoffman, it seems that you are very committed to Fossil Free AU as being one of the founding members of this coalition. However, do you think that you're going to be concentrating too much on this cause and ignoring the others and ignoring the other causes that you explain in your campaign?
No, I don't think that I'll be focusing on this too much. I'll be focusing on this, giving it the exact credit that it deserves. I think this is one of my key issues for a reason, because I've been so involved with Fossil Free AU since the very, very beginning. And I think that's not going to change, but at the same time, it's not going to take away from the other responsibilities that I will have to serve as being student government president. I think more importantly, this is a cornerstone issue on this campus. 80% of students last year voted in this referendum saying that they wanted to see our endowment divest from fossil fuels. That means it's the role of student government to support what 80% of those students want. And we need to make sure that I and the rest of student government will do everything that they can to make sure that that happens.
Great. I have a question. Ms. Banerji, you clearly stated on your Facebook page that divesting from fossil fuels is a moral obligation. However, have you taken into account the cost barriers you might face when addressing this issue?
As a school, we pride ourselves on caring about the students and caring about the future of who we will become after we graduate. Investing in fossil fuels when there is an inevitable climate catastrophe if we continue burning oil reserves is basically a huge basically it's hypocrisy. And I think that that needs to be strongly worded and strongly translated when students are speaking for the next semester and the next year. I think that yes, although there is an argument that maybe it doesn't make sense financially, that's not the point. The point is that as a university that is green, as a university that prides itself on being caring about recycling and caring about students and caring about energy, we need to exemplify that by divesting from fossil fuels. And it's also about stigmatizing investing in fossil fuels. It's just like how the divestment movement stigmatized tobacco. We need to stigmatize divesting fossil fuels, and that's the point. It's not about whether or not the university can make money.
Ms. Wirth?
I think an important consideration in this issue is that divesting from fossil fuels, first of all, is not actually tied to the university budget. So it doesn't affect our tuition, it doesn't affect financial aid. Statistics also show that divesting from fossil fuels and investing in clean energy is not only not harmful to a university's portfolio or a nonprofit's portfolio, but can actually be beneficial. Within the next 50 to 100 years, these companies in oil and coal will no longer be around because their reserves won't exist. And if they do, and we're still burning them, we're effectively killing the earth. So what we need to recognize is that clean energy is the way of the future, especially within the next 50 to 100 years. So not only does divestment not damage our portfolio, but it also gives us the opportunity to invest in future profits.
Mr. Bowders, did you have a comment?
Yes. As Sophia alluded to, it is very important to realize the way this university is funded. 80% of tuition dollars is what funds this university. There's a very strict separation between tuition and endowment. The truth of the matter is we have no idea how many fossil fuel companies are being funded through this endowment. The first step in divestment is a transparent endowment. That way we are all aware of how the money is actually being spent. It is the job of a university to prepare us all for the future, and it is honestly irresponsible to prepare us for a future that isn't free from climate change.
Mr.
So,
Hoffman?
Sophia, you're right. I think that it's the moral question of our time, and I know, Tyler, you said that it's the most important thing to combat climate change, and Poulami, the one line that's on your platform about fossil-free, all very fair points. But saying it and doing it are two totally different things. We need someone who's willing to be in this boardroom, who's been there since day one, who understands that not only will this have zero effect on our tuition, but that we want American University to be leaders in this movement. And at the same time, it's what's right, and it's feasible, and now that the CSRI committee has gone through, and now the next steps with the board, this can easily happen with the right people backing it and the right fighter in the boardroom.
Does anyone else have any comments on that topic?
Actually, I have a question for Mr. Bowders. According to your Facebook page, in order to address the divestment issue fully, you propose that the Board of Trustees must notice the issue. How do you propose to act on that claim?
Well, there's this kind of misconception on whether or not the Board of Trustees is informed or they're just actively ignorant. Since there are so many of them, it's hard to assume whether or not all of them are actually fully aware of this issue. In order to address this, it's important to realize, as the SG president, the type of access you do have to the members of the Board of Trustees. You do sit down on these meetings, so I think it is fully in my responsibility to come up to them during breaks in these meetings, maybe over falafel balls, and just strike up a conversation about divestment, just to ensure whether or not they are actually informed or not.
Great. We'll be right back with the 2014 SG debate. Welcome back to the 2014 SG presidential debate. Before we begin our next topic, I wanted to go back to Mr. Hoffman for the comments on the divestment issue.
Sure. I think members of the Board of Trustees really hide behind the fact that they like to claim fiduciary responsibility, and frankly, I'm sick of that. I think the next step, and really where student government can play a huge role, is making sure that we put pressure on the Board of Trustees by using alumni. It's a big place where fossil free has fallen a little bit short in reaching out to alumni. But the student government president, besides having direct access to the Board of Trustees, will have access to a lot of alumni, and that's a great way to put pressure on the Board of Trustees and making sure they understand that that's where they're getting their money right now. And that's where we need to put the pressure.
Okay. And thank you, Mr. Hoffman. And now we'd like to move on to our next topic. We would like to talk about the student activity fee. Each council will have 2 minutes to talk about this issue. We've noticed when we were coming up with our questions, you guys spoke about the student activity fee. You spoke about not that much, but you brought up the issue. What are your thoughts on the student activity fee, Mr. Hoffman?
Great. So I think the student activities fee reform is great. I think it should pass. I think it will pass. But I also think it's a start. Now, as a club leader, I saw how important it was to make sure that the percentages that was given to AUCC and Student Media Board was upped. It was very, very important. But it's a first step. To me, I think the next step is looking at student government salaries. Student government executives are paid a ridiculously high amount of money. And I've asked a lot of students during this campaign what they thought about student government salaries, and they think that they're too high. Personally, I think we should take those salaries and we should move them into Student Media Board and Club Council, and instead change it to fair compensation, like free housing and a meal plan, and maybe even tuition remission. Now, I'm not trying to get rid of compensation altogether. I understand how important it is. I understand how hard people work. And I'm also a student that's here 100% on student loans, so I do understand that that would be important. I'm the exact student that would be targeting. But the right compensation should be the things that actually make sense, and that money should be in the pockets of Student Media Board and clubs and organizations.
Ms. Banerji?
I'm extremely supportive of the student activity fee redistribution, especially because it'll directly help and affect small clubs, large clubs, and student organizations throughout this campus that maybe have felt marginalized and not heard and supported by administrators and student government in the past. I think the student activity fee is going to completely change the game for media organizations like WVU and ATV. I know we're sitting in a studio where the students that are recording us are using equipment from the 70s that they bought in 2002, and they haven't had an opportunity to even reevaluate that. The student activity fee redistribution is going to change that dialogue. Furthermore, small clubs and organizations put on amazing events. Last night I went to an event with the Latin American Student Organization, and with the small membership and the small funding that they do have, they're able to celebrate their culture, they're able to celebrate their members, and that's really who this student activity fee redistribution is going to help. Although I do think we do need to reevaluate executive salaries, Alex, I don't think it's completely feasible to move students who are execs onto campus just because that might not be something that execs want, and you're limiting an opportunity for a low-income student or a student who cannot afford to not have a salary to run for an executive board position if they're also paying for the university by taking up a part-time job. I know I work a job as an AU student right now, and that helps me pay for my college tuition, so it wouldn't be feasible to completely take away salaries for execs.
Ms. Wirth?
I'm absolutely in favor of the student activities fee. I've been very clear about that in my campaign, and I think that it's a wonderful opportunity to not only increase the current funding of clubs that do exist, but also have the opportunity for new clubs to come in. I've spoken to a number of people who are interested in bringing in new clubs. I've spoken with student media, people who want to bring in new magazines, new newspapers, and unfortunately can't because the funding just isn't there. Student clubs are really the cornerstone of student life, and I think that that's something that we forget here. And I think it's time that student government recognize student clubs as being the basically equal partners that they should be. I think part of that comes in terms of advocating with student clubs. There are a lot of student clubs who have very specific advocacy interests, and student government doesn't recognize those. Having them as an equal partner in advocating for these issues is key. In terms of executive pay for student government executives, unfortunately, eliminating it, I don't believe, is something that's a very good idea. And the reason is that student activities has a 25-hour requirement every week for student executives to work actively during that time. Unfortunately, most students are unable to take on another job to pay for outside of both academics and a 25-hour per week requirement, and unfortunately that's just not feasible. So keeping that executive salary, I think, is paramount in terms of making sure that student government remains an inclusive, or rather becomes a more inclusive organization and really involves as many people as is possible.
Mr. Bowders?
This past semester I've actually had the opportunity of being on the SALT committee that has put together this referendum, and it's actually been an honor to see student government and the media board and AU Club Council come together. Having all three of those governing bodies agree on something isn't something you see every day, trust me. But no, I do think it's important. As a club leader, Queers and Allies, we don't always get the money we get, but we also recognize that we have been one of the more privileged clubs, but every single week in the email box, we see other clubs coming to us asking for this co-sponsorships. In terms of media, it's the reason why your moderators are sharing a mic this evening, is because the money to upgrade just doesn't exist. As far as SG salaries go, if it wasn't for an SG salary, sadly, I couldn't even be sitting in this seat contemplating running at this moment. The majority of the money that is made by the execs is made over the summer to offset housing. And to be quite honest, offering free housing for these SG execs actually costs more than the amount that we actually pay them.
Mr. Hoffman, do you have a rebuttal for Ms. Banerji's and Mr. Bowders' comment?
Sure. You know, I've been painted as someone who wants to get rid of SG salaries completely throughout this campaign. That's just not the case. Frankly, I want to do what a lot of different student governments across the country do, and that's give them free housing, give them meal plans, and really the next step is talk about tuition remission. The idea that part of what this is doing is really should be part of our tuition. And I think that, you know, this is a service job. I understand that this is also saying that low-income students, it could be difficult. I am one of those low-income students. I am a person here on student loans. The salary that's created would be someone that would directly affect me. But I'm still saying that it makes more sense to have housing, meal plan, and tuition remission. And honestly, I'm not the only one that thinks this. I've asked a lot of students. When I tell them how much a student government president makes, they flip out. They think it's ridiculous and they think it's too high.
Mr. Hoffman, Those are great remarks on that topic. But do you realize that what you're stating is a contradiction? You're saying that you want to cut, but you're also falling in that percentage. So you're willing to give up, to clarify, you are willing to give up that salary to go and give it to something else, such as housing and other things like that?
Yes.
And is there any other way that there could be a compensation, or will people have to actually have a voice to talk about this topic?
Sure. So I think, first of all, like I said, I think the student activities fee reform, and also now talking about student government salaries, execs is really a multi-step thing. The third step really is talking about federal work-study jobs. Personally, I think that this has been tried in the past, and I think it needs to be tried again to turn some of the lower-tier student government jobs into federal work-study jobs. Now, I think the reason this has failed has just been the way that people have tried to market this to the university administration. I think going to them and saying that they could be saying to potential freshmen that we could be upping our federal work-study jobs by X percentage and also be a student leader at the same time could be a really, really valuable way to make sure that actually happens. Now, at the same time, I am willing to give up that salary. I also am willing to say that I would rather have free housing and meal plan, some type of tuition remission, because I think that makes more sense. Put a student government executive on the freshman floor of a dorm. Tell them how they can get involved on campus. Tell them what the important things are that they need to know when they're first coming onto campus. Who better than the people leading our student government to do that?
Ms. Wirth, comment?
Yeah, I guess just in response to that, I think it's important to remember that student government is an extracurricular activity. It's something that students participate in, and it shouldn't be exclusive in terms of, one, because you can't afford to even consider running for a position, or because you're not a federal work-study student, and therefore you wouldn't be able to participate in those lower-level positions if you're not. I don't believe that turning student government into something that includes federal work-study or that doesn't offer compensation for a 25-hour-per-week requirement is something that's appropriate.
Mr. Bowders, you had a comment or rebuttal?
Yes. First of all, Alex, you mentioned SG president as a surface job. I personally don't think that either myself, Poulami, or Sophia, and I shouldn't speak for them, would be sitting here if we thought of this as just a surface job. And I would also like to touch upon the work-study comment. I am a work-study comment, and I am a work-study student. And the way in which these lower-level, lower-tiered SG positions work is they are tied to stipends. And I have talked to my supervisors in the Center for Diversity and Inclusion where I work, and you cannot tie federal work study to stipends. So this isn't a failure of marketing, it's just the reality of the legalities surrounding work study.
Okay. I actually have one more question for Mr. Hoffman. Mr. Hoffman, you say that you want to pass student activity fee. However, in your campaign, you understand you want to continue the success of a bigger concerts by making them bigger and better. How can you accomplish that within the transition year when you want to pass student activity fee by limiting student government spending?
Oh, I'm sorry, can you repeat? I didn't hear the first part.
It's okay. You say that you want to pass student activity fee. You just stated that. However, in your campaign, you want to continue the success of concerts and other events by making them bigger and better. How can you accomplish this within the transition year when you're in favor of decreasing student government spending?
Sure. So I think the way that that's done, and obviously, this is not really under the purview of the president. This is really under the vice president. But having talking with WVAU and other students on this campus, it seems like a great way to do that, first off, would be to have WVAU start combining more of their concerts with sub. I think, honestly, sub is a really great way to have a lot of the money, but I think WVAU really should be the ones who are actually planning out these concerts. It's a great way to do that. Secondly, we happen to be really lucky that we go to a school in Washington, D.C. that has a lot of other schools that are here. I think it would be great to see us partnering with other universities to actually make those happen and make a much larger concerts in other venues. I think that could easily be doable.
Great. So moving on to our next topic, MGC space. This is huge. Everyone's talking about it. People want to know what we're going to do with this space in the next coming year. This question is for Ms. Banerji. 3 out of 4 candidates have brought up this transforming the third floor of MGC in the Career Center. But it seems that you really haven't addressed the issue throughout your campaign. So I wanted to know, do you believe that this issue is relevant?
Absolutely. I think that the MGC space is something that a lot of students are wondering what's going to happen, especially because it's kind of stayed vacant for the past semester. And I think the biggest thing right now is what is going to happen to that space. There's a lot of mystery around it. I know I spoke to one of my supervisors from my past job, and she had no idea, and she's an administrator in the Office of Campus Life, and a bunch of students have heard whispers of what it could potentially be. I think that the most important thing right now moving forward is to make sure that some part of that space becomes student space, becomes student lounges. There's a lot of students on this campus that don't feel like they have a space where they can just hang out. We have a library, great, we can study there. We have cats in, great, we can perform there, but where's our space to just sit back, relax, and enjoy ourselves with our friends? I don't want to really hang out in TDR. I want to eat in TDR, but I don't really want to hang out there. So I think that the biggest issue moving forward is to consider how can we make some of that space student lounges. We also need to consider about Greek life. Is there any way that we can get our Greek life representative to talk about considering if any of that space can go to Greek life? How can we also connect academics? There's College of Arts and Sciences is the biggest undergraduate program here, but it only has Hearst, and Hearst is a bunch of labs. Not a single CAS student has ever told me that, yeah, there's definitely a space on campus where I feel comfortable just hanging out with my CAS friends and studying with them, because there's really no space that exists like that on campus. So I think moving forward, there's a bunch of options and a bunch of things that we as students need to talk about and really voice our opinions on, because I think that's the biggest issue, is to make sure that students know this space is going to be given to something, and we should have a voice in what that something is.
Mr. Hoffman, you have a comment?
Sure. I've been working on the student space issue since August. Originally, way back when, I tried to get a political office on campus shared between Democrats, Republicans, and Libertarians. And then it dawned on me that there's enough space up there for more than just that. There's enough space for organizations to share offices. There's enough space up there to make sure that we have actual lounge space. There's enough space up there to make sure that Greeks can actually be represented and that they have their own offices that could be shared. Not to mention the fact the Wexler Theater is up there, never gets used. That could be a room for chapter meetings, could also be a movie theater. There's a lot of things that could be done up in that space, and I think it really needs someone who actually has been working on this from the very beginning, not someone who started working on this when they started running for president.
Rebuttal or comment, anybody? For more on the MGC space, I'm curious for Ms. Wirth and Mr. Bowders, how would you guys approach this issue? Ms. Wirth?
Sure. So this is something that I believe very firmly in, and I think it goes beyond just having I think the ultimate goal is to have a student union building, and I think what that means is that not only do we need to have more space for clubs, more space for Greek chapter organization rooms, but also recreational places. There are a lot of schools in this country, in fact most of them, that have some sort of recreational building that's dedicated just to student life, whether it's food, whether it's pool tables, some more foosball tables, and I think that that's something that I definitely will advocate for in the future. I think that we have a lot of academic buildings and no one building that can be dedicated solely to student life, and that's something that needs to happen immediately.
Mr. Bowders?
Ideally, my version of the MGC third floor is empowering AUCC with student activities to give them control over rooms that are up there. I'm not saying all the rooms. Personally, I feel that Greek life is growing faster than we can even imagine, and they too deserve a space on the third floor. But going back to AUCC, they deserve to have these rooms contracted out to them. Therefore, as a club leader, when you go in and you reserve these rooms, you don't find yourself the day before kicked out because university administrators needed a room. This is actually on my possible first day plan, to go in and have a sit-down meeting with Dr. Garrow Hansen, who I know is very passionate about ensuring the MGC third floor, and really sitting down and having a very constructive dialogue with her. I've talked to her a few times in the past. Her and I have like a kind of quasi-working relationship, and I'd really love to get the ball rolling on that.
Okay. We're going to go into our next topic is the Wonk campaign. The Wonk campaign has gained a lot of publicity throughout the years, but mainly negative. What is your opinion on the Wonk campaign, and how would you address it? Like, would we drop the campaign? Do we keep it? What is your vote? Mr. Hoffman?
So let me say that I'm not running for president because of the Wonk campaign, and I'm also going to be the honest one up here and say student government can't do anything about the Wonk campaign. But I'll also say that when it comes to being student government president and being able to talk to President Cohen, Gail Hansen, members of the board of trustees, if you think that the #1 issue that I should be talking to them about is the Wonk campaign and what's on the side of our buses and what's in the metro, then I'm not your candidate. But if you want someone who's going to go in there and talk about the real issues, like divestment, like tuition, and like student space, then vote for me.
Ms. Wirth?
No, Ms.
Banerji, sorry.
I completely disagree with you, Alex. I think that the Wonk campaign, because it's the university's way of representing its students, is crucial to students. I one day will become an alumni of this university and will hope that when I talk to someone who could be a potential employer, they don't relate me to the Wonk campaign. I personally don't identify with it, as many students at this university do not identify with it, and they've been very extremely verbal about how they do not identify with it. Now, where that issue stems from, there's a bunch of reasons, and I think that the main issue is that we haven't been educated about it. It was kind of thrown at us, and I was an orientation leader the summer after my first year, and at that time it was just rolling out, and not a single student really asked me about it or wondered what it was. But the fact that Anderson Cooper, who received the Wonk Campaign Award, didn't know what it was when he spoke to Kathy Griffin at New Year's, I mean, that is poorly reflective of us. And I think that the biggest issue right now is...
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to cut you off
Sure.
because we're running short on time. Ms. Wirth?
Sure. So I think what's important to remember is that we wouldn't be talking about the Wonk campaign if it didn't matter to students. They've shown that time and time again. So this is really about developing a campus culture, and ultimately my personal opinions about the Wonk campaign don't matter, because what matters is the student opinion and how effectively, as president, I'm able to represent that opinion. I think that it's also untrue that student government doesn't have a voice in the Wonk campaign. The student government secretary actually sits on the...
apologize.
Oh, sure, no worries.
Mr. Bowders, final comment?
Students of this university do not like labels being placed upon them, and this is what the Wonk campaign does. The truth of the matter is that student government can, in fact, do something about it, and they already have. Rosemary Cipriano, our secretary, has been sitting down all year to open up the dialogue. What the SG president next year can do is to sit down and to open the dialogue and make sure that this is money that is actually being spent. Yes, it's 1% of the budget, but that's sure a heck of a lot when you consider the budget as a whole.
If you'd all like to give your closing comments before we continue the debate. Mr. Hoffman?
I've heard a lot tonight from what all of us have had to say, and I think what it comes down to is two things. The first, who do you want on the border? Who do you want arguing for the things that you care about, and who do you want fighting for what you want? If you want more of the status quo in student government, there are 3 other candidates up here you should vote for. If you want something different, if you want realistic, obtainable goals, then that's what I'm offering.
Ms. Banerji?
I will continue to fight for the student voice. I am running on this I'm running for student government president because that's the most important thing to me, student voice and student action. And I think that this week I've really gotten a chance to listen to what students are concerned about and what they want to see in their future SG president and what they hope that the SG president can do for them. And I think that if elected, I will be able to continue listening to students and continue being a vehicle for the student voice if given a chance to not only represent the students, but to be in that boardroom.
Ms. Wirth?
Something that I've seen in the last year and a half, but especially in the last week and a half, is the power of this campus community. I think something that's important to remember is that we are not just students and advocates, we are all advocates. We all have issues that matter for us, and those have to be reflected back to the student government, and then the president can effectively advocate on behalf of those issues. But it's not just one voice, it's a collaboration. It's a collaboration for progress, and it's something that we need to drive together.
Mr. Bowders?
Something that I've noticed about the way this campus views student government is that they don't instill the confidence that it actually deserves. Therefore, I hope that you find me to be the confidence that you would instill in this organization. The confidence stemming from the very thorough and very detailed platform that I've laid out for all of you that is accessible pretty much everywhere. Confidence in the qualifications that I bring to the table as an employee, as a university club leader, as a former SG director, and as a former educational board member. And I'm very happy that I've been here this evening, and I look forward to seeing you all at the town hall portion.
It was a pleasure.
Pleasure.
Well, that'll do it for our debate. Be sure to check out our town hall debate at 9 p.m. in Tavern, where you can ask candidates the questions that matter to you. By using our hashtag SUDebate, and our moderator may ask your question to that candidate. From ATV, I'm Krystal Foster.
And I'm Cody Cohen. Good night.